Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's program sponsored by Metro West Climate Solutions and co-sponsored by Seafree, Lincoln, Green Newton, and the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. I'm Tom Walker, and I'm a member of the Metro West Climate Solutions Steering Committee. Metro West Climate Solutions is a partnership of the congregations and organizations in the Metro West area, including the First Parish churches in Weston, Wayland, and Lincoln, and Framingham, as well as Seafree Lincoln and Energize Wayland, and a growing list of individuals. Our mission is to foster sustainable, resilient, and low carbon communities and to host timely programs that encourage people to get involved in bringing about solutions to our climate challenges, which seem to grow with every news cycle. For more information about our work or to view recordings of our past programs, visit our website, metrowestclimatesolutions.org. In the past month or so, our team has been following, with a certain degree of alarm, I'll note, the MWRA proposal to downgrade the water quality classification of the Charles. This would permanently authorize sewage discharges whenever rainfall exceeds the capacity of the combined sewer system, a change that we think has serious implications and deserves a broad public discussion given our decades of investment aimed at making the Charles a swimmable river. To this end, we're delighted to have Emily Norton with us tonight. Emily has served as Executive Director of the Charles River Water Association since 2018. She directs a staff of scientists and advocates focused on protecting and restoring the Charles and its watershed communities. During her tenure, the organization has more than doubled its staff and has expanded its work in municipal climate resilience, dam removal, reducing invasive species, and more. Emily previously served as Massachusetts chapter director for the Sierra Club. Emily is joined tonight by Julie Wood, the Watershed Association's Climate Resilience Director. Julie runs the Charles River Climate Compact, which is a regional coalition of cities and towns working together to address the many issues our natural and built environments face as we confront a changing climate. Julie has grown the group to include most of the cities and towns in the watershed. She's also led the development of the Charles River Flood Model, a planning tool that provides information on where and when flooding will occur as a result of climate change. Following the presentations, we've reserved time for Q&A. We ask that you please use Zoom's Q&A function for your questions rather than the chat. So without further ado, let me introduce Emily. Emily, take it away.
Tom, thank you so much. And I'll just let folks know we also have Danielle Brewer from CRWA. She's going to be making sure that the slides move without any errors. So thank you so much, Danny, for being here. We are really, really grateful to Metro West Climate Solutions for all the work that you do. It's vital for inviting us here tonight, and also to the co-hosts of this event. We've got Green Newton, Massachusetts Rivers Alliance, and Lincoln Seafree. So really appreciate you all spreading the word. And with that, let's load up the slides. All right, dumping more sewage into the Charles, just say no. That pretty much sums it up. We'll get into a little more detail than that. Our brief agenda for tonight is to give some brief background on what combined sewer overflows even are, why we have them, what the MWRA is proposing, what we think they should be proposing, and then most importantly, what you can do to help protect the river and achieve a sewage-free Charles River, which I think we all agree is the best goal. So just some background on how we got here. For those who don't know CRWA, we were founded literally 60 years ago this year, and we have been playing a leadership role in the cleanup of the Charles ever since that time. But the Charles's problems began way before the founding of CRWA, and for those that are sometimes in the audience, there are folks who remember these days. Our former governor Dukakis remembers swimming in the Charles, but the last beach in the lower basin, which is what we call the area between Watertown and Boston, closed in the 1940s. As far as we can tell, there were at least 7 beaches. Many people are familiar with Magazine Beach. Well, it's called that because it really was a beach there. A big Milestone for a cleaner river was the passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972, which called for fishable, swimmable rivers by 1983. Haven't quite achieved that. Another big milestone was in 1995, the EPA, the Region 1 EPA, New England Area EPA, started something called the Clean Charles Initiative, where they had a goal of a swimmable Charles by 2005. And then even just this year in August, Governor Healy announced her biodiversity initiative, which, among other things, called for significantly reducing or eliminating combined sewer overflows. And the point here is that the greater Boston area has been promised a clean, healthy Charles River, clean enough for swimming, healthy enough for swimming for many, many decades. And it's time we achieve that goal, not give up on it. So where is the issue that we're talking about? What we're talking about are 9 specific outfalls in, as I said, the lower basin, and you can see this map here. They are between Cambridge and Boston in areas that I'm sure you recognize. There is also one in the Muddy River area, in the sort of Emerald Necklace area, that's not under consideration for reasons we could get into. But what we're talking about are the 9 locations along the main stem of the Charles. And why is this a problem? Probably not going to surprise anyone here. Contact with sewage-laden water is very, very bad for public health. Just a few things that it can cause: gastroenteritis, rashes, hepatitis, cholera, death. That one sounds pretty bad. So definitely negative impact on public health to have raw human feces in water that people have contact with. And this is not theoretical. This is not just in a textbook. Last year, Boston University did a study of hospital visits in the Merrimack River area, and they found that visits from gastrointestinal illnesses increased after CSO incidents. So we have no reason to think that that's not the case in the area of the Charles. All right, so why do we have CSOs? It's basically an issue of infrastructure. Where you see those outfalls in that map that we showed you is where we still have what's called combined systems, where stormwater, which is basically just rain that goes into a storm drain, goes into a pipe and discharges into a water body, in this case, the Charles, is collected in the same pipe as your wastewater, which is simply when you flush the toilet, when you wash your clothes, when you run your sink, that's wastewater. And as you can see with the image on the left, when it's dry weather, meaning it's not raining, no problem. Everything goes to the Deer Island treatment plant. The problem is the image on the right, particularly large rainstorms, where the stormwater in these, especially these bigger storms from climate change, there's so much water that it overwhelms the capacity of the combined pipe system. And if we did not let it discharge into the river, you would have sewage backups into people's homes and businesses, into the streets, and that's obviously unacceptable. So that's why we still have what's called CSOs, combined sewer overflows. In contrast, a newer system or newer cities never built combined systems. And where we don't have these issues anymore in our system, it's where MWRA has spent a lot of money to separate those pipes. So as you can see with a separate system, all of the rainwater, all the stormwater goes into the river, which has its own problems, which we'll be talking about, and all of the sewage always goes to Deer Island. So one innovation is if we find that the areas where we still have these combined systems and it's very expensive or very complicated, maybe they're under buildings, they're attached to buildings, whatever the complication is, and it's difficult to separate those systems, another step you can take, or a different approach, alternative approach, is to collect the stormwater and in such a way that it does not enter the stormwater system at all. So you might have heard of the phrase nature-based solutions, rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavers, any sort of innovation like this that directs stormwater away from the storm drain and has it go into the ground, which is more replicating nature, is a good thing. So we'll get into that, but just wanted to give you these insights into why this is even happening. So just to give you a sense of historically what's been happening, how much sewage is going into the river, this shows how much sewage has been entering the Charles over the last 5 years. The light brown is how much the MWRA under the agreement since the 80s is allowed to discharge. And the dark brown is how much is actually being discharged. And as you can see, there are many years where they're actually dumping more sewage than they're already allowed to. And that is basically related to weather. When we have years with bigger rainstorms, that's where we have more sewage being discharged. So keep in mind that the MWRA and the cities of Cambridge and Somerville are part of the Boston Harbor lawsuit, and they have been for decades, and they're already not complying with the obligations under that lawsuit. And this slide makes that really clear. The yellow line shows what they're new. All right, I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself here. What they're proposing in this solution is the yellow line, and that would be even more sewage than they are allowed to discharge now. So just to give you an example of how much data is actually available, this is all publicly available and you can dig into it. You don't have to take our word for it, but this is just the amount of number of activations. If you see the column all the way on the right, that's the number of times there were discharges, and then the volume is millions of gallons from each of the outfalls. And this is the total of millions of gallons in 2024. So as you can see, it's above the allowable limit, which under their current permit is 13.1 million gallons is allowable in a typical year, which we'll get into. So anyway, if this is just to show you that if you really want to dig in and see how much sewage is going into the river each year, it's all publicly available. All right, so where's the law in all of this? Some of you are probably, maybe all of you are probably wondering that. It gets very detailed, but it's really important, particularly in light of the editorial in the Boston Globe you saw last week, which we will be talking about, to understand the legal context for all of this. The Clean Water Act, passed in 1972, does not allow sewage to be discharged into rivers. The Clean Water Act, the federal government directs states to set what's called water quality standards. In our state, that falls on Mass DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, and they classify the Charles River. They classify water bodies all over the state, but the Charles is classified as Class B. And that is defined as no CSOs are allowed. But Emily, you just showed us all these CSOs. Yes, I did. Mass DEP and US EPA, in order to be reasonable, because these improvements can take a while, this is infrastructure we're talking about, they allow with a Class B water body that there be CSOs for a limited time frame under what's called a variance. And a variance lasts for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And it is not a get out of jail free card that you can dump sewage forever. It does say you can discharge in these big rainstorms as necessary while you are showing improvement toward elimination. That's the whole purpose of the variance. The first one was granted in 1998. They've been granted every 3 to 5 years since then, most recently last year, although that is sort of in a legal limbo right now. It hasn't been approved yet by EPA. So in this latest proposal, a long way of saying, when MWRA proposed in October for a November 19 vote by their board that they would change the classification of the Charles, what they wanted to do was change it from a Class B to what's called Class B CSO, which, as the name implies, allows periodic CSOs. So the legal leverage that we have right now to force cleanup, we would lose under what they proposed. And CSOs, we would have sewage not only going into the river forever, but an increasing amount. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julie.
Thank you, Emily. Good evening, folks. Echo Emily's thanks for our host for having us and letting us dig in on this topic. And thanks to all of you for showing up on this cold evening and showing your interest. So I know, great, thank you, Emily, for the great background. I know some folks have maybe been following the press on this somewhat closely. If that's not you or that is you, don't worry. We're going to try and get everyone up to speed and on the same page tonight about what is going on right now. Any utility owner, city, town, or water authority like MWRA across the country that manages a combined sewer overflow system has to develop what's called a long-term control plan. And these are long-term plans to control or bring down combined sewer overflows. And these set targets for how often the combined sewer overflows can discharge sewage into a water body and how much sewage can be discharged as well. Because combined sewer overflows are triggered, I should say, by rainfall events, and rainfall is extremely variable year to year. We all know that, especially these last few years where we've been in drought and then all of a sudden much more rainy than average. We use something called a typical year or a fake year of rainfall. And it's just pretty much what it sounds like, an imaginary year, days numbered 1 through 365, each with a set amount of rain, when it would fall, how quickly it would fall, how intensely it would fall, all across the year. That is used in computer models to then determine what is allowed for overflows and what is not allowed for overflows. And Emily showed in some of these previous slides that although this typical year is what we use to govern and control our long-term control plan process and what projects have to be done and what work has to be done, in reality, what happens on the ground is determined by real world weather, not this imaginary weather scenario. So the typical year for the original long-term control plan was based on past conditions, did not include climate change. That is one of the reasons we are seeing much more overflows in reality now than the plan would have predicted. That original long-term control plan ran from 1985 into the early 2020s. It was supposed to actually end in 2020. But then got extended first 1 year, now obviously 5 years, because they actually still are not in compliance with that original plan. However, because that plan should be wrapping up, they have already been charged with developing this new plan or the updated long-term control plan. Originally, we anticipated a draft of that to be forthcoming in 15 days. We literally found out yesterday that the parties behind this plan, MWRA and the cities of Cambridge and Somerville, have asked for and been granted a 120-day extension until the end of April. So we will not see all of the full content of that updated plan until the end of April. However, they previewed what was in the original plan, since it was supposed to be due at the end of this month. And we know what the options are, and we also know what we would like to see in the plan. So that's what we're going to walk through in these next few slides. Next slide, Danny. One thing that they have to develop in the long-term control plan is the level of control. What is the target? What are they shooting for as far as what they're going to bring down those combined sewer overflows to in that typical year? These were the options that they looked at. Option A, which we grade an F, is that some combined sewer overflows would still occur in a typical year. So in, say, an average year, you're going to definitely have some combined sewer overflows. In a dry year, you're probably still going to have some combined sewer overflows. And in a very wet year, you're going to have a lot of combined sewer overflows because that's a very low target. Option B was to have no combined sewer overflows in that typical year or imaginary year. Obviously, that's a little better. And then they also looked at some design storms, a 5-year storm and a 25-year storm. Design storms are just what they sound like. It's a theoretical storm that you would use to design infrastructure. So in this case, a 5-year design storm is a fairly large storm. And option C would be for no combined sewer overflows in any storm that's a 5-year storm or smaller. So obviously that is a much higher level of control. And then option D, which we rated an A, is no combined sewer overflows except in very, very large storms, a 25-year storm or larger. This is the level of control that has been achieved in the Boston Harbor. And this is what is sometimes referred to as functional elimination of combined sewer overflows. The outlet and overflow points are still there, so that in a very extreme event, overflows can and do occur, but it is only in those most extreme events that they're going to occur. And then option E, which they really did not look at in this plan, but they sort of nodded to, and we like to keep it in the mix, is to have CSOs fully eliminated through sewer separation. This is essentially making Boston and Cambridge's sewer systems act like functional modern sewer systems like we have in the suburbs, like exist in the Metro West region, for example, where wastewater system is separate from your stormwater system. Wastewater system goes to Deer Island for treatment. The stormwater system does discharge into the environment. Next slide. Unfortunately, what MWRA initially tried to propose was the absolute lowest option, some CSOs in a typical year. So this means pretty much every single year you're going to have combined sewer overflows. It's just a matter of how much. On a rainy year, it's a lot. On a drier year, maybe it's not so much, but you are going to have CSOs be a regular occurrence in your river. And you can tell by the emojis, we did not like that plan. Us, and it sounds like many of you, as well as, a lot of residents around Greater Boston really raised a lot of concern over that. No, sorry, you can stay on the next slide. In this particular case, because of something that state and federal regulators required of MWRA Cambridge and Somerville in this plan, that they actually look at climate change and actually take that into account when they develop this new plan. In this case, it meant that what they were proposing is going to be more sewage going into the Charles than is currently allowed. Every other long-term control plan that has ever existed has been a plan to reduce sewage, to bring it down. That's essentially the purpose of why you develop a long-term control plan, to control combined sewers. And this was proposing to increase them. So Emily already previewed these numbers for us, but today, 13.1 million gallons is allowed in that typical year. In the future typical year, they are proposing a plan that would result in close to 30 million gallons going into the Charles. So that is, as Tom indicated in his introduction, a huge step backwards and essentially just giving up on all the investments that have gone in to clean up the Charles and make it the gem it is today. So we obviously strongly objected to this plan. As I indicated, we're successful in at least delaying it for a bit. But the initial proposal to have this combined sewage almost double is pretty alarming and does not give us a lot of faith in what we might see going forward. Next slide. Part of that initial plan also included changing the classification of the Charles River from a Class B to a Class B CSO, so that essentially MWRA and Cambridge could just continue dumping sewage into the Charles forever. They would no longer have to develop these long-term control plans to bring combined sewer overflows down. So this is our little bit tongue-in-cheek slide, but if we were making a movie with MWRA as the villain, we might paint this as their oversimplified plan to, plan action 1, dump more sewage in the river, plan action 2, change the laws to make this acceptable. Next slide. Here's a few things that were not in the plan. Ending CSOs, hopefully that one's probably pretty obvious if they're doubling CSOs. Another thing that was really absent, notably absent, is green stormwater infrastructure. Now, this was not a huge surprise to us. We've been involved in this planning process from the beginning. It was just about 2 years, and very much at the very beginning of the process, really almost before they had their first public meeting, the team behind this plan had decided that they were going to put a maximum on the green infrastructure that they would even potentially look at. So they capped that from the get-go, for reasons that are not completely clear to us, and we've continued to ask for more information about and continued to ask them to reconsider that, because green stormwater infrastructure, as we'll show in a few subsequent slides, has been a very critical low-cost tool that other cities have used. Sewer separation was also abandoned pretty early on. It is somewhat disruptive with digging up every street, but for the most part, it works very well. Climate resilience, this is the opposite. This is giving in to climate change. It's saying our infrastructure cannot keep up with climate change. We're not even going to try. I imagine if your city or town leaders were saying that, imagine if our state leaders were saying that. That is essentially what MWRA is saying. We're giving up. We're not going to keep up with climate change. There's no true accounting of the costs and benefits. The costs they're looking at are the financial cost, and the benefit they're looking at is singular, how much combined sewer overflows will be reduced. They're not looking at things like recreational benefits, full-scale economic benefits, environmental and public health benefits. That's something other cities have also been including in plans, that wasn't included here. The health threats posed by combined sewer overflows have been essentially ignored in what MWRA is doing. And then environmental justice considerations also virtually completely ignored. All of the vast majority of the neighborhoods around this part of the Charles are environmental justice neighborhoods, which means that they are already overburdened by environmental degradation. Next slide. I mentioned this before, CSO elimination, virtual elimination, level of control that is to that 25-year storm level, meaning only overflows in very extreme events, is possible and was done in South Boston. A super common combined sewer overflow control technique is to build underground storage. Pretty much every major city that has had a combined sewer overflow plan implementation that's been successful has used underground storage tunnels. And what you do is you build a large underground tunnel and you use it to hold the combined sewage until there's room at the wastewater plant to send it there. Because a lot of this is just a timing problem. There's just too much water in the pipes for a short amount of time. So you just store it, hold it. You can see the map here. This was a pretty extensive tunnel lengthwise, and fairly costly, 225 million. More recent tunnels that have been constructed have been, more like 800 million. So these things are expensive. They are large infrastructure projects and they take a while, but they work. And the economic benefits and the public health benefits that we've seen in South Boston have played out. Next slide. I referenced that other cities are leaning into green infrastructure. New York City, how can you get denser than New York City? It really doesn't. New York City has managed runoff from 10% of the impervious surfaces in combined sewer watersheds through detention and infiltration source control. So they're treating 10% of this runoff, keeping it out of the sewer, keeping it on the surface of the land, while adding, beauty and greenery to their sidewalks. New York City, at first, had a goal of treating runoff from 1.5% of their impervious surfaces. Once they got going, in a few years, they got this up to 10%. So they surprised themselves with how well this was working and how much they were able to do. MWRA has said no from the get-go to this. Next slide. Another example of other cities doing what we're not, something called a triple bottom line assessment of traditional and green infrastructure options for controlling CSO events, really comparing the true benefits to residents of these options and having that understanding when you're making the decision about how much money to spend. If you spend maybe 800 million, let's say, on a tunnel, and it only has, one benefit in the form of reducing combined sewer overflows by a bit, but you're spending a little bit more on a tunnel and green infrastructure. The benefits from air quality improvements, water quality improvements, habitat improvements, recreational improvements can be, 3-4-fold for your return on that investment. So typically these studies show that it really is worth making those investments. Next slide. And then these next few slides, we're going to just try and do a little bit of debunking, some mythbusters, information lines, won't go as far as to say propaganda, but maybe things you might hear MWRA claim, and then what we see as those who have been involved from this process, who have been involved with planning on the river for decades, as the reality. The sewage is only entering a small area of the Charles, and it's very far downstream. They use that as an excuse as why it should be fine to just continue dumping sewage. I think all these have to click through, Danny, to show up. Yes, thank you. And geographically speaking, that may be true. It's a small percentage of the river mileage, but it is recreationally one of the most heavily used water sheets in the country. Anyone who spent any time in Boston or Cambridge sees how many boats are out there, how much time of the year. About 1 million people are getting out on the water every year. Next myth. And I already mentioned it's primarily environmental justice communities who are already disproportionately affected by pollution. We've reduced most of the sewage. We've done enough. We have reduced a lot of sewage. Very impressive. I love, Tom, how you kicked this whole thing off. Then why give up? Then why give up now? But the truth is we're also not, at full compliance with the Clean Water Act of a fishable, swimmable river. We've gone a long way there, but we have a bit more to go to have a truly healthy river that we all deserve. And we should have no untreated sewage going into the Charles. MWRA's mission is to protect public health, promote environmental stewardship. That's right there in their mission statement. So this is really just abandonment of that mission statement. Again, we'll think we've done enough when these are fully eliminated or effectively eliminated in the Charles. All right. The problem is stormwater, not sewage. And MWRA says that's not their responsibility. Stormwater is a problem. Folks in the Metro West may be very familiar with this problem. In fact, if you've been involved in any form of local government or maybe some sort of project planning, stormwater is a major source of pollution to the Charles. Cities and towns all across the watershed are spending millions to address this problem. MWRA thinks it doesn't have to spend any money or spend a tiny fraction of their budget to address their part of the problem. Stormwater carries nutrient pollution, which is what your cities and towns are working to address. This is bad for river health, but it doesn't have the same concentration of pathogens and viruses that sewage does that make people sick. And even if stormwater pollution were eliminated, the Charles wouldn't support consistent swimming when we have raw sewage going into the lower basin. We need to address both stormwater and CSOs. No one's saying give up on stormwater either. MWRA can't adequately address CSOs without considering stormwater. This has been just one of those bureaucratic problems that really is enough to just kind of drive you up a tree here. MWRA is indicating that they cannot deal with the water until it's in their pipes. So that's part of the problem that has caused this aversion to looking at green stormwater infrastructure on the surface of the land, because essentially it's not their problem until the water is in the pipe. So just frustrating there with levels of government. Many other cities have taken a much more holistic approach. Water is water, and we need to manage it. So let's look holistically. Let's not arbitrarily divide it into these categories. It's stormwater on the land and combined sewage in the pipe. Let's address it all. Of course, the cost is the big one. It will be too expensive. These are large numbers for sure, but these are lower numbers than a lot of other capital projects that are happening right now moving forward, and or in line with capital projects that cities and towns regularly move forward. We're also pushing MWRA, Cambridge and Somerville, to really hear the public. Let them weigh in. Don't you just decide that you want to save money, that it's too expensive. Let's have a community conversation about this. Let's folks weigh in. Let's let folks understand the benefits, and the costs, and then have that discussion. And then I think this is our last slide of this. This one also really can get under our skin. They claim that this was a collaborative process informed by public input. The cities and MWRA did have public meetings. If any of you got to those, or hopefully some of you got to those, that's great. That doesn't mean they listened to the public. The plan that they came out with pretty much demonstrates that they ignored almost every comment that was given in the public meetings, because 99% of the folks that took the time to show up at the public meetings and speak said, end this problem. Stop dumping sewage into our rivers and streams. Stop dumping sewage into backyards, because that's where it goes when these rivers and streams flood and there's a combined sewer overflow. So it was really a performative but empty process. The recommended plan that they initially tried to put forward doesn't include what was voiced by 99% of the folks that attended. And the process also got way behind, and they really kind of used those delays to their favor to just kind of move forward with this plan that they wanted and no one else did. And I think we have one last one. Discharges are mostly treated sewage, so it's fine. They do call the discharges that come out of the Cottage Farm facility in Cambridge treated. That is really an exaggeration of what's happening there. It is not treatment. It is not what we expect from wastewater treatment. It is not what is legally considered wastewater treatment in the US. It is not what is happening at Deer Island. At Cottage Farm, there is a storage facility, multi-stories underground, where the sewage gets chlorinated to kill the bacteria. That's pretty much all that happens there. The bacteria is killed and then dechlorinated and then discharged. So all the other chemicals, viruses that, survive that treatment are still going straight into the river. Thank you. Next slide. I think I'm handing it back to you, Emily.
All right. Thank you, Julie, so much. And we can, in the Q&A, we can get more into additional questions or more detail about those questions. But wanted to jump now to what we're doing about this. If people do not raise their voices that they care and they don't like the direction that this is going, then nothing will change. Even in the 80s, when the MWRA was created, the lawsuit was launched, etc. If you read the history, and if you're ever interested in a great book about the history of the Boston Harbor cleanup, I'll recommend one to you. But even then, it was the case that it wasn't just the lawsuit, and it wasn't just the creation of the MWRA. It was the public outrage and being on the cover of the Boston Globe every day at a time when people read the Boston Globe. So we've launched what we very subtly call the Cut the Crap campaign. We have folks dressed up in silly costumes. We have people showing up and marching, and we have people sending messages. And if you can go to the next slide, Danny, if you go to our website, we have this explainer video that goes into some of the details, 1 minute long, explaining why this is still happening. And it gives you a chance to click, send a message to the MWRA, governor, lieutenant governor, etc. And I think it's fair to say that it's a result of all the people who've been speaking out over the last month and a half. That's why this has not already been approved. So for those who are wondering if your voice really matters, your voice really does matter. And that's why any chance we can get to speak to folks like you all and urge you to take action, we're doing that. Next slide, please. We've had over 2,000 folks speak out with petitions and emails, hard copy petitions such as this image on the right. We've had our local elected officials in many of our communities, not as many as we would like, so that will be a specific ask, including from Cambridge, Watertown, Newton, one official from Waltham, we'd love more, the Conservation Commission in Weston. There's so many municipal officials that can be reaching out because from the MWRA's perspective, they're like, oh, well, people don't want their rates raised. That's just what they're looking at. They think people aren't willing to pay for this. We don't actually know what the impact on rates will be. It's entirely possible that it's not a major impact. There are a lot of major expenses that are rolling off from MWRA. They do 20-year, 30-year bonds. And so we've hired someone to look into this for us, but just hold on to that. There may not actually be that big of an impact on rates, but it is really important that people from all over the watershed speak out. We have state senators and representatives that are circulating a letter for signatures that is going to go to the MWRA. Next slide, please. We have been blown away by the number of advocacy and environmental groups that have sent letters and expressed support for this campaign, including many who don't work on water. And that's, again, incredibly valuable. The more voices, the better. So what can you do? We have a website, cutthecrapcharles.org. Please visit, take action. Send your own email. You can do that with the pre-written stuff. I'm sure everyone here has probably done something like that before, but it's even more valuable to send your own email with your own personal story about why this matters to you. And we have this information of the email of the administrative person to send it to, and we'll be sharing these slides so you have all this information. Your local elected officials, reach out to them that you would like them to use their voice. If you're not already on our newsletter list, please join. And that way you'll find out about future actions because this isn't going to be over in the next few weeks. It's going to be over the next year, actually, that these decisions are going to be made. And if you can think of friends of groups, friends of Hardy Pond, friends of Crystal Lake, friends of, every small local, really, it's just a matter of volume. Anyone you think that would matter, that would care about this, Rotaries, Scouts, anyone that you think would be interested and would want to raise their voice, we need them. And it could be your neighbors, it can be your relatives, doesn't have to be a group, but really spreading the word that the MWRA is going to dump more, what, in the Charles if we don't raise our voices. We really need people who care to speak out. Next slide, please. And the question comes, how much do we value a clean Charles? The photo on the left is the Milford Town Dump in 1965. This is a beautiful park today. In those days, it was the conventional wisdom. Everyone knew that Charles could not be cleaned up. And this is not Milford. This is near downtown. But we have a beautiful, much cleaner river today because people did not accept that conventional wisdom at the time. So today, when we hear it's impossible to clean it up further, this is the best we can do, no one wants to pay for anything more, we need people to rise up and say that's actually not true. Next slide. This is actually pretty hot off the presses. The Bar Foundation did some polling for us and some other environmental groups, and they included many questions about water. We're going to be doing a separate event to present to folks the findings here. But one of the questions they surveyed, these are people all across Massachusetts, over 1,000 people. One of the questions was related to clean rivers, and the conclusion was clean rivers are universally considered important. There is no constituency that feels clean rivers are unimportant for Massachusetts. So we are blessed to be in a state where people really love and value our environment, including our rivers. And as you can see, whether it's very important or somewhat important, everyone cares about our rivers. So that is something that we can use. Next step, next slide. And just a reminder, people are swimming in urban rivers elsewhere across the world, but even in this country. Portland, Oregon's been swimming in the Willamette since 2018. Folks might have seen the news about Paris getting ready for the Olympics, might have seen the news about Chicago just a couple months ago. They're swimming in the Chicago River now. So the idea that these other areas can clean up their rivers to make them safe enough for swimming, and freaking Boston can't, with MIT and Harvard, we're the innovation state, that just does not compute. Next slide, please. We say, why not the Charles? Is we're using AI to, for benefit. We're showing you what Magazine Beach could look like. And that's all for our presentation. Happy to take additional questions.
All right. Thanks, Emily and Julie. That was fascinating and somewhat depressing too at the same time, but I think it shows that there's hope for the Charles, and we can do this if we put the pressure on. I guess I think there are lots of questions this raises, and the one that really pops up for me at some level is, where's the governor on this? And I noticed in looking at the MWRA board, the Secretary of the Environment's the chair of the board, so it seems like the governor has some ability to influence this process. Is the governor taking a pass on this, or is she amenable to weighing in here? And can we, get her to play ball on this as well?
So I'm sure that she is aware of this, and it really is because of the Secretary of Energy and Environment, Rebecca Tepper. I think it's fair to say played a leadership role in them putting off the vote. They were supposed to take a vote on the MWRA's recommendation on November 19th, and they postponed that. And in our communications with her directly and with the DEP commissioner, who's actually also, DEP has also issued letters to MWRA and Cambridge and Somerville about this, they have been pushing back. So I don't want to say the work is done, but we've been pleased that the vote was postponed. And, it seemed like MWRA thought this was going to slide right through. It also is the case that the MWRA staff did not give folks a heads up. We weren't the only ones who didn't get a heads up. DEP, EPA, others that you would think, because they've been involved with regulating this for decades, would have had some idea of what was coming, and they didn't. So this really does seem to be that MWRA figured this is not that big a deal. And I can tell you from having been to their meetings, the public doesn't go to their meetings. They seem to be very isolated from public opinion. And we're trying to reduce that isolation and let them be much more aware of what the public thinks about the river.
I mean, it's amazing. We have one question here, and I'll read it verbatim. It says, I'm fascinated that the MWRA, who boast about the water quality from Quabbin, are okay with increasing pollution in the Charles. It seems to me that they may worry about pure water from the Charles River might be competitive within MWRA water. Do you have thoughts on that?
So the Quabbin is used, as folks know who get MWRA water. That's the source of the drinking water. And we're talking about the sewage here, but certainly I agree with the overall theme that how can you be so proud of Quabbin water and yet so cavalier about dumping sewage, treating the Charles, this beloved jewel of Boston, continuing to treat it like a sewer. I mean, that's an approach starting in the 1600s. Do we really think that that's the best we can do? And just for folks, no, we didn't get into it too much, but if there are any rowers on this webinar, then you're probably aware that when there is a CSO discharge, we warn people. We have on our social media red flags. There are actually physically red flags at the boathouses, and people are warned not to even boat for 24 hours. For 48 hours. So we're not even talking about swimming, even contact as rowers have or paddlers have with the water that way. And that does sometimes seem to come from the MWRA, that they just don't think that sewage periodically is that big a deal. And I'm like, well, it is a big deal to the people who have contact with the water and get sick from it. It's a big deal to them. It's the big deal to people who aren't able to swim. Think about those hot summer days. No matter what income level you are, you don't have a river to just jump into for recreation and to escape the heat. And it'll be that way forever if the MWRA has their way. So there does seem to be a disconnect. They don't understand that this actually is a big deal.
I
Has there
love
been
that commenter um taking the extra leap that they want to cut off the competition of future drinking water from the Charles too. That's we've internalized some conspiracy theories. We've never heard that one.
has there been any change in the leadership of the MWRA, or is there something going on there, or is this business as usual for them?
No, and maybe there should be. The current leader has been there since 2001. And my view is if that person is not interested in finishing the job, then hand it over to someone who is. I mean, this is a really, really important issue, and they're not treating it like that. It seems like they just want to, for folks who remember the George W. days, they just want to declare mission accomplished when the mission has not been accomplished.
And I think this is something else we've seen in our work to compare to what other cities are doing and learn from other cities. The attitude and the ambition around this, other cities have looked at this as an opportunity to invest in their city with the green infrastructure, using these infrastructure projects to also reduce flooding and build resilience. So yes, MWRA has done a lot to bring the combined sewer overflows down in the past. Absolutely. But what we're seeing now, as far as just their whole attitude toward this program, is really not where it needs to be. And if that was a 180, it can really make a difference. We've, literally had leaders from other cities come and talk to us and talk about working with the community, talk about listening to the community, getting ideas from the community, and then implementing those in partnership with the community, not only for the sake of combined sewer overflows, but all those other community benefits.
You haven't talked much about the costs that the MWRA has estimated for doing the things they proposed. Are those costs, in your mind, reasonable, or have they inflated them to make it seem impossible to do the higher end programs?
That's a really good question. The high end is very high, in the billions. Part of what we were saying about the process, having a lack of transparency and getting so far behind, toward the end of the project, or excuse me, toward the end of the planning phase, like basically September and October of this year, is when most of the real information started to become public. Even in those 2 month time, things were changing. We would see this project costs this much, and then the next presentation you'd see, oh no, this project costs this much. So I think there are still some questions there on our end as far as, okay, well, what are the final estimates that they're actually looking at? But I guess just to kind of put some numbers out there for folks, generally the plans that would be a level of control with 0 CSOs in a typical year, or less. Those for the Charles, those are around 800 million. It's not only the Charles here. Their plan is looking at the Mystic, and one of the Mystic tributaries, the Alewife. So, those would be, and certainly a lot of money. And then once you jump into the higher level of controls, the 5-year and the 25-year level of control, you are in the billions, with some plans being multiple billions. So it's a range for sure.
But keep in mind, they can bond over decades. Could be 30 years, could be 40 years, could be 50 years or more. You've got 2 million people getting sewer service. So we have actually hired our own expert to look at their numbers, and so that we're not just trusting what they say. If you remember, trust but verify, that's our approach to the claims that they're making. So we will be looking at what they say and sharing what our experts say the impact on rates would be. But just keep in mind, this is what MWRA does, is multi-million-dollar projects. Julie gave the example of the CSO tunnel in South Boston, which is why people can swim safely at Carson Beach. It was 235 million 15 years ago, whenever it was, which would be about a little over 300 million now. That sounds like a lot of money. Why wasn't MWRA freaking out then? I mean, right? Because it was the right thing to do. And now it's completely changed the quality of life for the people in that area. They don't have to deal with sewage on their beaches all the time. So if this is something we want, then we invest in it. But we don't even have that information yet on what those costs will be.
And we
Interesting.
see capital projects in this range. You know, these are not that far outside of the range of what capital projects cost. Things are expensive. There's a highway project that we've been following in the Charles, 2 billion. Communities, maybe some of the communities you guys are from putting in, new high schools, a single high school in one community, hundreds of millions. So
That's a great example. 660 million, I think,
In
for
Lexington.
electing
Yeah.
one high school. So is cleaning up the Charles for millions of people, is that worth, a little bit more than one high school? I'm guessing a lot of people would say yes. And
Well,
so just keep in mind, in the 80s, if we had asked people, hey, should we spend $5 billion to clean up the harbor? There might have been some people who were like, wow, that sounds like a lot of money. Who today would say that that wasn't worth the investment? I didn't do the math on what 5 billion then, would be today. A lot more. So I think we start with what we want, and then let's figure out all the engineering options, all the ways to pay for it. There have been times where the federal government, even somewhat recently, the federal government was offering funding for water infrastructure. I wouldn't say right now, but I'm optimistic that sanity will prevail on the federal level again. And this is many years in the future that we're talking about. So I wouldn't just oh, it'll cost money, forget it. We're not going to do it. I wouldn't let that be an argument.
we've got a couple of questions here that deal with MWRA targets, and one of them is the target MWA proposes is higher than what you want to see. However, you pointed out that the MWRA has not met the targets in the last 5 years. How important are the targets if they are not met?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. The targets are legally binding though, so they are still working to meet those targets. So yes, they are delayed in meeting those targets, which is unfortunate. Again, we will give the credit where the credit is due. They have made a lot of progress under that initial long-term control plan. Yes, not fully there, still have more to go. But if those targets weren't set at what those targets were, they would have been able to say they're done. Because the targets were ambitious, they are still required to work on them. No one's letting them off the hook. The targets are the targets, and they still have to work to achieve those. So we definitely want the targets to be at least as ambitious. I mean, we're not okay with as ambitious. We want the targets in this next long-term control plan to be more ambitious and work how this program intended, that over time you are ramping down and eliminating the sewage discharges.
It seems like at some level you need ambitious targets, but you also need a way to enforce compliance with the targets. Is that part of your thinking about how you move forward? How do you actually get them to do what they're supposed to do?
The current targets are part of the original Boston Harbor lawsuit. So those are still being overseen by a federal judge. Parties come in and meet with the judge every however many months, check in. Okay, what have you looked at? Do you have a plan to get in compliance at this site? Do you have a plan to get in compliance at this site? Okay, what have you looked at? What haven't you looked at? What have you tried? So that is still being overseen by a federal judge.
And would that be true of the next plan?
No, that case could wrap up if it could wrap up if everything gets complied there. So it would be DEP and EPA overseeing the compliance with the new updated long-term control plan. That other cities have done this process without a lawsuit, so it doesn't always have to be that way.
Mhm.
but it's still they would have to, now meet these new targets. And they have a long time to do that. These are very, I mean, long term is right there in the name, I guess.
Yeah.
And also just to, we advocate for a clean river. And if we have to advocate and ask people to send messages and pressure state regulators and or EPA, we'll do that also. So if we don't think that something is being enforced sufficiently, we will not be shy to speak up about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just astounded at some level that they're arguing they can't do the more ambitious plans because of affordability, but they haven't provided any estimates of rate impacts. That just seems like they're flying blind.
It really, and that's why I say it was very telling to me. Like when you go to their meetings, they're held at Deer Island or they're held in Chelsea at their headquarters. You have to show ID to get through a guard. They're not hearing from the public. They really have no idea. And folks have heard me speaking about this like on Jim and Marjorie last week, where I was on there with Patrick Heron from the Mystic. We hear from people their stories about how much they care about the Charles and how much the Charles means to them. And that's why it's so like does not compute about what they would be proposing. They're not hearing from people who grieve their loved ones next to the Charles or love to paint or love to walk next to the Charles and what just viscerally this river means to them. If they heard from people the way we do with the regularity that we do, I can't imagine that they would have had this plan. But it's just a big disconnect. And that's why they're just sort of treating it like, oh, there's a problem to be solved. We can just solve it this way, keep dumping. People seem good with it. We'll just keep doing it.
Well, and the other thing I think that I noticed in looking at the plan is there doesn't seem to be any analysis of how much the recreational benefits of having a clean Charles are worth to people. And I can't imagine that's not potentially a really huge number. And, in most environmental decisions, some, estimate of the benefits is considered when you're looking at the costs. And, to try to make a decision without knowing whether it's worth a lot to people is crazy in my mind. But, it just seems like they're making decisions without having adequate information in front of them to make decisions. It may be that, you know, planning for a 25-year design storm is a lot. I mean, it could be that, maybe they should be spending more on stormwater and designing for a, 5 or 10 year storm, and that gets you more swimmable days than, just doing the 25-year storm and ignoring the stormwater. But regardless, not looking at those benefit numbers is nuts.
It's so true, Tom. And that kind of creativity, even that you're just coming up with having, followed this from the press, it is not there. That kind of creativity of, hey, well, did we think about this investments here and here to get to that overall goal that we all want, which is, clean, healthy river, reducing sewage, reducing the impacts of this sewage discharge, isn't there. They are so in their silo, as I mentioned, the example, down to the idea that they cannot even think about the water until it is in the pipe. It is just not their problem until it has entered the pipe. So that kind of holistic, creative thinking has been so absent from this process, which is, one of the many reasons it's resulted in this terrible proposal.
Yeah. Well, I think, we're probably starting to run over in time now. I think maybe that's a good place to kind of wrap up here. I know the Metro West Climate Solutions Group is more than happy to weigh in with letters whenever we need to. And, we'll go ahead and do that, certainly based on this call. And I don't think there'll be any resistance to doing that. This is a horrible proposal, and, they need to sharpen their pencils and really think hard about this. I'd like to thank, both of you for joining us tonight, and hopefully we've got some more people on board to weigh in on this thing, and hopefully we'll keep spreading the word. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and if you have any last words, please feel free to weigh in.
just really grateful for you and the group for having us, and for the 28 people left for sticking around. And please stay in touch, and please keep taking action.
All right. Thank you very much.